Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are Family to Family Network in Houston, Texas. It is all of 12 o'clock Central Time. My name is Judy Blake. I am a program coordinator for Family to Family Network. I want to introduce my incredible, amazing colleagues who I could not do this job without. Leslie Lawson.
Hello, everybody.
Leslie has been with Family to Family for, oh gosh, we stopped counting how many years, right, Leslie?
Yeah, you're telling my age.
Yes, a long time. Yes, my age as well, but you've been with Family to Family a lot longer. Christina Zavala, our amazing bilingual
Hola.
assistant,
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
and Leonela Castillo,
Hi. Hola.
also bilingual. So thank you all so much for joining us. We know how busy you are. We know how overwhelming life is, and we are grateful that you have taken the time to be educated. This is the second of a two-part series, Special Education Top Tips for Successful ARD IEP Meetings. For some reason, my cursor again does not like to, there we go. So welcome back. Just a couple of quick reminders. This is a very safe place. There are no silly questions. We want to be respectful of everyone's comments. Please don't think that you have to remember everything. Once everyone completes the survey, after the presentation, we will be sending the slide deck. We will be sending the recording. So please don't worry that you have to be remembering everything. No worries if you're a little shy. We understand. You can always private message myself, Leslie, Leonela, or Christina, and we will ask your question anonymously on your behalf. What we don't want is for you to be afraid to ask anything. I guarantee you, we've heard it all. We all had to start somewhere, and this is a lot of information to absorb. Just make sure that you mute yourself when you're done talking or done asking a question, because we want to make sure that everybody can hear. We hope to finish within an hour, and if we run over, forgive us. We just want to make sure that we answer everybody's questions. Again, you'll be sent the slides, so don't worry. And you can always follow up with us for any questions that you may have. So tip number one, and I see that somebody logged in. If you could, the person who is M's phone, if you could private message me or put in the chat box what your name is, I would really appreciate it so I can mark you present and make sure that I send you the recording. If you could do that, I would appreciate that. So, tip number one, you know your child better than anyone else. You have as many rights as a parent and in the special education process. But it's critical that you learn your rights. Each child is entitled to receive what we call FAPE, F-A-P-E, and that's a free and appropriate education. I think it's difficult to know what your child needs if you don't know what your rights are. It's important to educate yourself to make sure that you know your rights. What FAPE does is it requires schools to provide special education to meet the unique needs of your child. So what that means is that the IEP that I had for my son, who's now 28, is going to be very different, or was very different, than Leslie's IEP for her son, or Leonela's IEP for her child. Everyone's is different. It's not some cookie cutter where you just put information in and stamp someone's name on it. And I think that if you are realistic, I think that if you really know your child, you know them better than anyone else. That's not to say you can't respect other people's opinions and listen, because I think that ARD committees can give you insight that, you know, you may not have thought of. maybe didn't know about it, but just remember that you are an important part of this process. So tip number 2, you can see at the bottom that we have put 2 links. Everything that we talk about is based on IDEA. Just a little refresher, because we love our acronyms in the disability community. And IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this is federal law, and it was created to ensure that public schools, and that includes charter schools, by the way, KIPP, Harmony, Energized for Excellence, all those charter schools, that they are serving the educational needs of students with disabilities. So this isn't Judy's law, Leslie's law, family to family network law. It's federal law, and everyone must abide by it. The links at the bottom are from a wonderful organization called Disability Rights Texas. It's another nonprofit, and it explains what your rights are in both English and Spanish. For those of you on this call who prefer your native language to be Vietnamese, it is also in Vietnamese. I can't recall if it's through Navigate Life, Texas, or Disability Rights, but you can Google IDEA manual in Vietnamese and it will bring it up. You need to read it, learn it, use it, take it with you. The more that you know, the more you are educated, 2 things are going to happen. You will be more empowered, and you will be more respected as an equal member of the team, because they know you know your rights. So you can download it, and I strongly suggest that you do that. Tip number 3, the IEP. Again, we love our abbreviations. Individualized Education Plan. Now, if you are new to Texas, Texas, of course, we have to be different. And what happens is in other parts of the country, the IEP is called, well, I take that back. It's the reverse. We call them ARD meetings here, admission, review, dismissal. In the rest of the country, it's all IEP, Individualized Education Plan. So the IEP, that is the meat of what we all are doing. That Individualized Education Plan is what is being discussed in your ARD meetings, in those school meetings that you agree to with the school. And the IEP, it should be individualized, and it is to ensure that your child who needs modifications, accommodations, special education, that it provides them that free and appropriate public education. It's going to emphasize related services, and it needs to meet the unique needs and prepare them for 3 things: further education, employment, and independent living. That is the purpose of what we do. You wouldn't sign any contract without knowing the details, knowing who it applies to, making sure it's correct, making sure you really understand it. So I think that you really have to think of this IEP, this document, as a contract between you and the school. And really, it is the parent's role to understand it, make sure it's correct, so that you can be that equal member of the team and you're able to participate in your child's development. Always understand what you're agreeing to. And we're going to go over this in a little bit, but you don't have to agree. If for some reason the school is suggesting something and you're thinking, that just doesn't sit right with me, or Maybe you want more information. No problem. You just need to not agree if you don't feel comfortable signing it. And that's okay. We always encourage parents to work collaboratively with schools. I know personally that schools are very overwhelmed. Some of my friends are teachers, and it's really challenging. You know, it was challenging before Harvey. Harvey made it worse. It was challenging with COVID. COVID made it worse. And then the freeze. And there's a lot that our kids are working with and having to contend with. And I feel for the schools. I truly do. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have. However, your child still needs to make sure that they have an IEP that works for them and that they can succeed with that IEP. So tip number 4, what should you do before your ARD/IEP meeting? Gather that information. I had a parent email me just the other day. It was Monday. She had her ARD Tuesday morning and hadn't received any documents. You want to be able to review the information prior to the meeting. And the reason you want to do that is so that you can highlight areas, maybe put some question marks, maybe you're not sure. So highlight, ask questions so that when you walk into the meeting, you are prepared. Gather the information that you need. You're going to get draft copies of the evaluations, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. This is called, it's the craziest abbreviation, PLEF, which is really kind of funny in my opinion, but that's what they call it. So how can you have a meeting about your child if you don't have the current data, if you know where they're at? Find out what those proposed IEP goals are. What are the objectives? Is there going to be a behavior plan? Have they reviewed the autism supplement? If you don't know what that means, please let us know. But the autism supplement must be considered if that child qualifies for autism and is receiving special education. Is there any vision or hearing supplements? What about adaptive technology? So you just want to make sure that you review that draft IEP so that you can ask questions and be a part of the team. You want to know what people are talking about, because if you don't know, it's going to be really hard for you to contribute. Tip number 5, evaluation. You have a right and need to know what your child is being evaluated on. It's no different if you go into a doctor's office and they say, maybe they want to draw some blood work. Well, chances are you're going to ask, sure, no problem, but what are you going to do? What kind of tests do you want to run with that blood? Well, it's no different for an evaluation. Services that a child needs are based on that initial evaluation. And if the term FIE rings a bell, it should. That stands for full and individual evaluation. And once they have that evaluation, that's how they're beginning that data collection. Or not beginning, because they should be collecting it in the classroom, but that's additional data that they are collecting. There's a timeline for that initial evaluation. So to know what is happening and to know about that evaluation, you have to make sure that you realize there's that timeline, because they might need a further evaluation. Find out when it's going to be completed and then get it documented in that individualized education plan. And that's what I think parents maybe don't quite understand, is that there's a timeline for the initial evaluation, but Sadly, there is no required deadline for any other requests for evaluations or reevaluations. And the clock is ticking. If your child needs help or something's changed, you want to make sure that you have in writing what is the school going to do. We all get so overwhelmed. And if the school wants to call you, that's okay. They can certainly do that. Or sometimes when you're picking up your child or you're in the carpool line or they mention something to you, no problem. But then you always want to follow up with an email so that you can document what the school said, who you talked to, and make sure that you understood what they were telling you. Always have everything in writing. Tip number 6. So it's meeting time. And that can be really kind of intimidating because you've got all of these people sitting around the ARD table and they're discussing your child. Some of the people maybe you've never met before. So you've got maybe 7 or 8 people, and then there's you. Again, you want to be prepared. Make sure you've reviewed that document, highlight any questions, bring your IDEA manual with you, but never go alone to a meeting if possible. If you bring a friend, a neighbor, anybody, it's just nice to have that moral support and have another set of eyes and ears. You don't necessarily have to bring an advocate. Some people do, but you just want someone who's going to be there for that moral support. Make sure they meet with you ahead of time, that friend or relative, so they know your concerns. Maybe you can say to them, hey, when we start talking about this, meaning maybe placement or evaluations, that they really listen in, because maybe that's something that you're still kind of nervous about. Maybe they can take notes. Make sure that that ARD agenda is followed. They just want to support you during the meeting. Take your child to the meeting. You know, there's an expression, our kids are more than just paper, and that's so true. And I think sometimes when you see the IEP and you have this, 35 to 50 page document with all of these test scores and history and thoughts and comments, we sometimes forget, these are really human people behind this paper. So bring your child, even if it's for a few minutes. Let them introduce themselves. What are their interests? What are their likes? What are their dislikes? And then they can return to class. Once they turn 14, they will be attending ARD meetings, but I think it's really a nice idea when they come and everyone can put a name to the face, to the paperwork. And I think it's kind of nice for the child too. My son never stayed because that just wasn't his thing. But I think it's at a minimum really important that he met the group and that we were talking about what was best for him. Tip number 7, during the meeting, gosh, ask questions. We know that it is intimidating and you don't want to feel like you don't know what you're talking about, but this is a lot of information. So if you don't know what people are talking about, how can you possibly make decisions, agree to the document, and understand what's going to be best for your child? If you don't understand something, ask. It doesn't matter to us if you ask two or 3 times. Like, okay, what was that abbreviation again? What did that mean? Because it is a lot to remember. And for those of you on this call where English is your second language, if you want an interpreter, please ask for it. But I would give the school at least a week's notice if you want. And make sure that you have the interpreter so that you feel comfortable. And if for some reason you are fine with it being in the English language, even though it's your second language, that's okay. Just make sure that you do what's comfortable for you. What is the data that they're using to support that decision making? How is the data collected? Remember that you have to consent to everything that the school does. evaluations, testing, knowing what they're doing. And the reason that Leslie and I are saying this over and over again is because we really want parents to remember that you do have these rights. And the school can't just go ahead and do something without your consent. But ask for support if you need it. Asking those open-ended questions. If you ask yes or no, you're going to get a yes or no answer. But maybe it's something like, well, what are your thoughts on how we could handle Johnny doing A, B, or C? And whether it could be paying attention in class, trouble finishing assignments, just anything. But the more open-ended questions you ask allows the team to brainstorm. So what's it going to take? What's it going to take for your loved one to succeed? We always want our kids to be in the least restrictive environment. Studies show time and time again that they do best when they're with their typically developing peers. And it can be a child with significant disabilities. It doesn't matter. But people do best when they're with their peers. When you go to the grocery store, be it H-E-B, Kroger, Target, Randall's, isn't just a grocery store for people with disabilities. Everyone is included, and we are born into this world included. But sometimes our organizations, our agencies, our public schools, they feel the need to segregate, and that's not always a good thing. Now, for some kids, like my son, he needed kind of like a cool-off room. Sometimes it was just so overwhelming for him to be in a class of, 25, 30 kids. So sometimes it was really nice to go to either a resource class where there were half the number of kids, or to go somewhere where he could just kind of regroup. And that's okay. But the least restrictive environment is generally where we want our kids to be. So during the school year, make sure you communicate with the teachers. Make sure you communicate with the staff or professionals, the speech therapists, if your child's getting speech therapy. You don't want to make the ARD meeting, that IEP meeting, the only time you meet and talk to one another. I'm not saying that, you can contact them every day, because again, teachers are very, very overwhelmed. They have so much on their plates, and we ask them to do so much. But develop a system that works for you. It could be a binder. It could be emailing back and forth. Some schools have these online portals. But you just want to make sure that you're checking in to see how your child is doing. And, if there's something significant that's happening at home or in your child's life, let the teacher know. I've been a single parent for over 20 years. And, I always knew what was happening on the weekends in my home. But if they were with their dad, I don't really know his schedule, because sometimes it's going to be different than mine. So Sunday night, I would always just email the teacher or teachers and say, hey, listen, just wanted to let you know Ryan was at his dad's this past weekend. So work together. Working together for the IEP is only part of the process. It's working together all year long. Talk about concerns, develop those goals so that your child can succeed. And as I mentioned, set up that communication system. What's going to work best for you? Some people work at night and they're sleeping during the day because they work a night shift, some parents. And then the other parent is the one who's working during the day. So let the teachers know, what is your schedule? What's the best way to communicate? And just make sure that that communication isn't just during the ARD meeting. Leslie. So Leslie's going to talk about document, document, document.
That's our tip number 9 for sure. make sure you put all requests in writing and get responses in writing. If it's not written down, it might not happen. So a lot of times parents will say, well, I emailed them and asked them to reply in writing, but they picked up the phone and called me, and that's okay. I know Judy touched on that. As soon as you get off the phone, send them another email. As per our conversation today, I understood you to say, so-and-so would do this, or XYZ. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Because a lot of times I think the school or parents can hear something and they meant something else. So it's good to make sure everybody is clear on what's going to happen or what's not going to happen. Be sure to read your procedural safeguards. They're required to give you your procedural safeguards at least once per year. And that document is very important. On page 2, it talks about what the school is required to do when they propose to do something or refuse to do something. So it's really important for you to understand your procedural safeguards. A lot of that's going to be in the very parent-friendly IDEA handbook that we keep talking about, but there are some things in the procedural safeguards that they don't really make as clear in the IDEA handbook, like something called stay put, where if you're in a disagreement, the child can stay put in whatever placement they're in at that time until the disagreement is resolved. So this is the link or the website for your procedural safe for prior written notice, which that's what they're required to do. If they propose to do something or refuse to do something, they have to put it in writing. And there's more information about prior written notice at texasprojectfirst.org. I love this website. It was created by people who have children with disabilities, and they make it very parent friendly, just like the IDEA handbook. And you can go there and search by age, you can search by topic. So I really hope you'll check this website out if you're looking for more information about anything on the special education process. Tip 10 is get educated. Learn as much as you can about your child's disability and learn as much as you can about the special education process. You can attend trainings by parent organizations like Family to Family, the ARC of Greater Houston. There's so many out there. Of course, you don't have time to do all of them, but pick the ones that really stand out to you. We also have an education service center, and they do provide trainings. Theirs aren't always free, but they do have some really good trainings. And we're in Education Service Center. We're in Region 4, if you want to Google that and see what kind of trainings they have available. Another thing I wanted to mention is the ARD agenda. There's definitely an order to the ARD meeting. They're not supposed to talk about placement first. There's definitely talk about the evaluation and their present levels, goals, and related services like speech therapy and occupational therapy, and placements last. I like the ARD agenda. It keeps everybody in order, and there's a good example of that at Texas Project First also, and there's the website for that. Be sure and use all these tools that we're talking about in the trainings, like the IDEA handbook, Texas Project First, Navigate Life. I'm not saying you have to sit down and read every little thing, but there's definitely great information in all of these tools. The Guide to the ARD Process. If you're in disagreement, definitely take a look at the Dispute Resolution Handbook. And if you have a young child, there's the parent companion, and that's great too. So there's great tools out there to help you learn your rights and become a great advocate for your child. And the more, I always say, the more you know, the more your child's going to get. So definitely get yourself educated.
Yeah, and I also put in the chat box the website for Texas Project First and Navigate Life Texas. And Christina or Leonella, if you could put the survey link in the chat box in case anybody needs to leave early.
Another thing you want to do is you want to get organized, maybe get a binder or an accordion file, whatever works for you, and organize all this paperwork. Make sure you have the latest evaluation, the IEP, report cards, progress reports. So you can find all these documents easily. You know, you probably want to bring that binder with you to the ARD meeting in case something came up and you're like looking back to see, oh yeah, we already mastered that goal. And if they were trying to have a goal that your child already mastered. So you want to have all of that with you and bring it with you and have it organized. I was not very organized at first, but I learned really quickly that it was necessary to be organized for these meetings. Tip 12, if you ever disagree. So you do have the right to disagree at an ARD meeting, and you shouldn't be afraid to do that. I'm not saying you should disagree about every little thing, but if you don't agree or you don't understand something, that might be the time to disagree. But just because you disagree doesn't mean something's going to be different. You have to take the next step if you disagree. If you don't agree with an evaluation, you have a right to an independent evaluation at the school's expense. They pretty much have to grant that, or they would have to take you to due process, and they don't want to do that. So they generally will grant independent educational evaluations if you request that. Like if you don't agree with their evaluation or the what their recommendations are based on that evaluation. It's like a second opinion. If you don't agree with the program or the services or lack of services, whatever you disagree with, you'll be given a chance to you should be given a chance to write this down, what you don't agree to, and have that attached to the IEP document. Like I said, if you don't understand what's happening in the ARD meeting, that might be a good time to disagree, so you can take time to figure all of that out. Maybe you don't have to disagree. Sometimes if you're not finished with your meeting, you know, there shouldn't be time limits to your IEP meeting. If you don't finish or there's not enough time for all your questions to be answered, a lot of times they can table the ARD. So that's different than a disagreement. That's where you table the ARD and we're going to come back, set a time to come back and finish the meeting. If they don't want to table the ARD, or if you disagree, you definitely you have to sign your name and check either agree or disagree. So make sure that's done. Because if you disagree and there's not a clear written statement reflected in the IEP, then it might look like you've agreed with everything. So if you do disagree at a meeting, they're required to have a reconvene meeting, another meeting, usually scheduled within 10 days of your disagree meeting. Of course, this is a default recess. The ARD committee can decide to make it longer than 10 days. Let's say you're in disagreement and you're asking for an independent evaluation. They may not have the reconvene meeting until that new evaluation is completed, or maybe your schedule or the school's schedule, maybe it's outside of the 10 days. But you always have a recess meeting to come back and try to come to an agreement. And during that time, you and the school should be working together to get more information, help you understand the process, and just both sides come together and bring more information. And hopefully at the reconvene meeting, you can reach an agreement. If you would like a state facilitated IEP meeting, that's where an impartial person comes in and just kind of facilitates the whole ARD meeting. You have to do that within 10 days of the first disagree ARD. So keep that in mind. And that is a state facilitated one. There are other facilitated meetings where maybe the school district has somebody in administration that can come in and facilitate. So that's an option too. That's a little more informal. So at the 10-day recess meeting, if you still are in disagreement, it's really important for you to check disagree. If you check disagree and do nothing, though, that's the same thing as agreeing with them. You have to take the next steps, which would be you can request mediation through the Texas Education Agency, or file a TEA complaint, or file for due process. I don't want anybody to be afraid of any of that, because generally what happens is once you file one of those three things, the Texas Education Agency encourages the school district to have a resolution meeting with you, and that's where things generally get worked out. That's why if you go to the TEA website, you're not going to see a whole lot of due process cases, because things generally do get worked out in the resolution meeting. But a lot of times parents, they don't get worked out till that time, because the school really wants to do what they want to do, what works for them. And a lot of parents don't know their rights and don't know this is part of the process. But those procedural safeguards are there for a reason. And you can read more about each one and figure out which one would be right for your situation. Like if it's real cut and dry, you can file a complaint. What's your complaint and what's the remedy to the complaint? And then sometimes mediation works, where an impartial person comes and goes back and forth between you and the school and tries to help bring you to an agreement. Or the last, worst case scenario would be a due process hearing, where there is a hearing officer. But like I said, most things generally get worked out before it gets to that far in the resolution meeting.
Leslie,
yeah,
I
go
received a
ahead.
private message. My daughter is 3, so she's not getting grades. What kind of documentation do they have to provide for her progress?
So you're going to have an IEP goals and objectives. The goals are for the whole year. The objectives are short-term objectives. They have to keep data on all of those. They can't just be, if you had a typical child and the teacher never wrote down homework scores or test scores, and at the end of the 6 or 9 weeks said, "Oh, Johnny, I think I'll give him a 70." Well, that wouldn't really be a good measure. So that's why teachers keep homework scores and test scores and project scores and all that. So with a young child like that with an IEP, the IEP goals and objectives have to be measurable, and they have to measure where your child's at. And so you should get an IEP report card that says, okay, on this goal, we wanted your child to do this 8 out of 10 times. Right now, after the first 6 weeks, they're only doing it 4 out of 10 times, or they've mastered this. Or if it's in percentages, if the goal says somebody's going to do something at 80%, then you should get an IEP report card. At the same time, other students get report cards that say, okay, well, we want them to do it at 80%, but your child's right now is only at 40%. So you should get that. If you're not, there's a big problem. And, we talk about data, and I think data collection is very important. One time I asked to see the data for my sons, and they couldn't provide it at the IEP meeting. And they said they were going to get it to me. And about a week later, I got the data, and I knew the data was just made up because they collected data on days that my son was not even at school. So that kind of told me that there was really no data collection. So, you do need to ask a lot of questions. You have to be a detective. Anyway, I
And
hope
Leslie, another
question.
parent asked, can you request this data collection before the 9 weeks progress?
I mean,
I
you
would
can
say,
I don't
yeah,
think you're going to get the
get
data.
much. Yeah,
Pardon? Sorry.
you wouldn't get as much. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would, have a parent teacher meeting and go up and just ask to see, can you show me the data collection sheets? How are you collecting the data? I mean, you could ask to see that. There should be a way for the teachers to collect data, and it's not every teacher is going to do it differently, but there should be a system.
And I hope that answered your question. I know, parent, you are worried about that, and I completely understand. And if you don't understand what's been collected and their progress, that's a perfect time to email and say, can someone please explain this to me? Because you need to know, because you can't develop goals and you can't track progress if you don't understand what the progress is.
Right. And we don't, at the end of the 6 or 9 weeks grading period, we don't want, yes, it is the same for the OT and speech. They should be collecting data. How do we know if the kid's making progress if there's no data collection? So it is important that that data is being collected. Speech and OT, they're required to keep notes. I think it's really important. You can have the greatest IEP document ever on paper, but what is actually happening in the school? Take time to go up there and observe and see what's going on. Go observe your child in speech therapy. You could learn a lot, and then you'd know what to work on with them at home. Same for OT. See what's happening in the classroom. It'll give you'll either get a great feeling or you'll get a bad feeling, and it'll prompt you to make change. So, because it looks great on paper doesn't mean that's what's happening in the classroom. Hopefully you're going to be pleasantly surprised when you go and observe, and you're going to say, oh, this is such a great class for my child. Another thing, I'm just thinking about some things, Judy, that I'd like to share. Okay,
because Ms. Harris is concerned that the OT is saying that the teacher is taking data. Well, and Ms. Harris, maybe that's something we need to, discuss after this webinar, but how much OT is your child getting? If your child's only getting maybe 15 minutes, then yeah, I can understand that. But I also would like to know more information about what OT your child's getting. So maybe we can discuss that after, if that's okay with you.
Another thing that I've been seeing a lot, especially because school's just started, so a lot of parents are saying, oh, my child's having terrible behaviors at school. They're asking me to pick him up early. The school should not be asking you to pick your child up early due to behavior.
I'm so glad you
Um,
brought that up.
Yeah, so if they're not able to provide your child with a free and appropriate education, guess what? They might need to pay for a private education. So what are they doing? Have they done a functional behavioral assessment? And maybe the teacher did one, but teachers are not behavior specialists. So if you have a behavior intervention plan and it's not working, your child is still having a lot of behaviors that are interfering with his or her education, maybe you need to ask for a formal functional behavioral assessment to be done by a licensed school psychologist or a BCBA. And then that professional observes your child, sees what the function of the behavior is, how the staff is responding to the behaviors, and come up with a good behavior intervention plan that everybody's going to follow, and maybe do a little training in the classroom on behavior. So yeah, I mean, they shouldn't be calling you to pick your child up all the time. If that's happening, there's a problem, and you need to request a formal functional behavioral assessment. And you would definitely be part of that because you know what works for your kid. If your child, like my son, if he had a behavior and they had a consequence for it, and that consequence was very rewarding for him, they were actually rewarding his bad behavior. So that behavior was going to continue. So you want to make sure you have people in there looking at what's happening. And it's nobody doing anything bad or wrong. Hopefully, it's just they don't know the function of the behavior and how to appropriately respond to it for your child, because what might be rewarding or a consequence to one child would look very different than it would for another child. Anyway, I've just been thinking about that because I've had a lot of calls recently about that. Tip 13, create a vision for your child. And I know a lot of you guys have young children and you're thinking, okay, why are we talking about higher education, employment, and independent living skills? Because you can't see that right now. But everything you do now leads to the outcome for when they're no longer in high school. So just keep that in mind. That's why we're talking about that, because everything you do now puts your child on a certain path. Will your child, and when we say higher education, employment, and independent living, that looks very different for each child too. But a little bit could make a big difference in their life when they're out of high school. So, for instance, my son had to work on things so he could go to a good day program, because he wasn't necessarily going to go have a job where he gets paid. Where Judy's son had to work on things because he was going to be able to go on and have a job like he does now. So when we talk about these things, it's not the same for every child. But the purpose of creating a vision is we want our children to be as independent and as productive and part of the community when they're out of high school. You know, we're not raising our kids to go live in the state supported living center. We're raising them hopefully to have a happy life and be part of the community. My son he doesn't get paid, but he does a lot of volunteering. You know, we want our kids to make a difference, and it'll look different for each kid and adult, but that's why we really need to have a vision. And nobody has a crystal ball at an early age, so have high expectations. And the IEP is like a map to get to the destination that you want your child to get to, or that they want to get to too. You know, if your child didn't have a disability, you would have certain expectations and want them to grow up and get an education, graduate and go to college, or get a job, and you want to have that same vision for your child with a disability, because let me tell you, there's a lot of adults with disabilities doing great things, a lot of different things. Some of them are artists, some of them work in jobs just like we do, some of them do volunteer work, some of them own their own business. So you want to have high expectations and definitely have a vision.
And a parent had asked at what age should we start reviewing that? So I'm not sure if you meant about the IEP or goals or what, but it's a process, and your child is going to have different interests. One year they might be interested in one thing, one might a year another. But like in middle school, when they start picking these elective classes, you want their classes to be centered around their interests so they can explore those opportunities.
Yeah, and when you get to around, you're always planning for transition to the next thing. So, when your child was in ECI, you were planning to transition to the public school, and then when your child's in elementary, you're planning to transition to middle school, and then to high school, and then to higher education. Around the age of 14, every student with a disability is going to have a transition plan that's going to really start talking about transition to adulthood. And that's when, it really gets more serious. But I'll say even at that age, just like with our typical children, that changes. They may be in ninth grade and think, oh, I want to be a doctor. But then by the time they get to a senior, they're like, okay, yeah, I'm not so good in biology. I don't think I'm going to be a doctor. Or, young kids may want to be an astronaut, but maybe science isn't their strength, and we always have to guide them to their strengths. But we do want to look at what they want to do if they can tell us, and help them as much as we can to get, to realize their goals. So one thing we always talk about is Medicaid waiver programs. These are disability programs in the state of Texas that provide long-term care services for children and adults. Some parents see the word Medicaid and think, oh, they're not going to apply to me because our family income is too high, but that's not the case. Most of these waiver programs don't look at the family's income. They only look at the child's income. And so it's really important to get your child on these interest lists. Right now, they're about 15 to 20 years long. And so if your child is going to need these services when they're older, which a lot will, you don't want to wait to get on the waiting list when they need the services. So get your child on these interest lists now. If their name comes up and you don't need the services when their name comes to the top of the list, you just say no, thank you. I can't stress this enough. When my son became eligible for the class waiver, he was a teenager, and it was like we hit the lottery, and we got so many services, and it really helped our family tremendously, and it helped him so much. All these links are going to help you learn more about the waivers. So these are different than health insurance. Some of you guys may have kids that have CHIP or Medicaid health insurance. This is totally different than that. This is services like respite care, attendant care, specialized therapies, employment services for the older people. So yeah, if you don't do anything else this week, call and get your kids on these interest lists. And we have them all listed here. If you have any questions about this, you can call any of us or email any of us, and but those links there under each one are going to take you to a website that explains the services of each waiver. And you don't have to worry about a whole lot right now, except getting your child on the waiting list and making sure that you check in with them every now and then. A lot of times they'll check in with you. Do you still want to be on the interest list? You can be on as many interest lists at the same time. And then when you receive a waiver, like my son came up on the class waiver first, we accepted that. And then when he came up on the HCS waiver, we had to look at both waivers and decide which one to keep. You can only receive services from one waiver at a time. So it's really important. And there is our survey. Please, please, please take the survey. The survey helps us to get grants so we can do more training like this and reach more families, and then also provide the services, like when you call us and need more information, or if we refer you to different resources. Everything we do depends on these surveys that help us to get more grant funding so we can educate people. Okay, Judy, I don't know. Do we have more questions?
I don't think so. Let me look. Chat, hold on. Yeah, some people had to log off. So a mom asked, what is the autism supplement thing that we talked about in the beginning? So what I'll do is type in the Texas Project First website link, Mom, so that you know what that is. But if your child's been diagnosed with autism and is required and has an IEP with specialized instruction, the ARD committee must consider that. And what it is basically several strategies that include what Leslie talked about: behavior supports, maybe it's extended time, maybe it's social skills, maybe it's additional training. But that's what the autism supplement is. And that's something that Texas really did right, is with the autism supplement. But the ARD committee needs to discuss each of those 11 strategies to see if they can help and support your loved one. And I'll put that link right in the chat box.
And if anybody would like to see a sample, I'd be happy to share the one that they did for my son. Of course, yours would probably look very different, but I like to share ours because it just shows how specific each thing is for my son. And that's, so your child should not look like mine necessarily. It probably will, some things will be the same because of the nature of autism, but it just shows you how it should be very specific to the child and not just cookie cutter information in there.
So, Leslie, I will email you the mom who wanted the sample of your IEP.
Okay, great. Or the autism supplement?
Yeah, same mom. Yeah.
Okay.
And I just put in the link for the autism supplement through Texas Project First. It is in both English and Spanish, which is really great. And what I love about Navigate Life Texas is that that's in like over 100 different languages I've never even heard of. So that's really a great thing too. So gotta love technology. So glad, M's phone, that you are getting so much out of this. You know, we're happy to do it. It's really important to us. We take it both personally and professionally. It matters to us. Any other follow-up questions from anyone? So the link has been listed. I thank you all so much for joining us. Please, please don't hesitate to reach out and to let us know if you have any other questions, if there's anything more that we can do for you. Maybe you're thinking something just popped up. Please, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of the day. And Leslie, Leonella, and Christina, if you could stay on, that would be great.
Good to see you guys.